Welcome to the PlantMichiganGreen.com Gardening Show. Presented by the Michigan Nursery and Landscape Association. Now here's your garden show host, Dr. Bob Schutzke.
Hello everyone. Welcome to the PlantMichiganGreen.com Gardening Show, brought to you by the Michigan Nursery and Landscape Association. I'm Dr. Bob, your host for the 2021 gardening season. Tune in every Saturday at 4 p.m. through August. We will share garden insights, feature guests from Michigan's green industry, and answer your questions submitted through PlantMichiganGreen.com Ask the Expert. Our hope is to make the most of your outdoor living experience. During the week, you can log on to PlantMichiganGreen.com, your landscaping and horticulture resource, to pose gardening questions, find a professional horticulturist, locate a retail garden center in your area, or become aware of the rewarding careers in Michigan's green industry. We will spend today's show with Chuck Martin from Dow Gardens in Whiting Forest in Midland, Michigan. He will be with us after a short break, so stick around and get into the gardening groove on the PlantMichiganGreen.com Gardening Show on News Talk 760 WJR. Welcome back. We're pleased to have Chuck Martin from Dow Gardens in Whiting Forest in Midland, Michigan, to talk about one of Michigan's prized destination spots. Hi, Chuck. Thanks for joining us on the PlantMichiganGreen.com Gardening Show.
Good morning, Bob.
Can you start our conversation with some background on yourself?
Yeah, thanks a lot, Bob. So I've been a horticulturalist here at the Dow Gardens since 1984, so over 30 years. Before that, I got formal education at Michigan State, and then I went on to the University of Wisconsin, both degrees in ornamental horticulture. And so I've been here working or playing around at Dow Gardens and enjoying working with the public as well as the plant material here at the Mid-Michigan area.
I like what you said about playing around, because when we think about public horticulture in the garden setting, to many of us it is playing around. It's a labor of love.
Yeah, Bob, I look quite often at gardening kind of like a marriage. There's rough spots and there's good spots, and you have to have a love for it in order to really succeed about it. But anyways, there's weeds and bugs that get into the gardens, just like issues get in your marriage. But man, if you love it, you fight ahead for the beauty of it. And the bottom line is, at the very end, you get a very beautiful outcome of flowers and shrubs.
That's a great perspective, Chuck. Hey, so what can our listeners look forward to when visiting Dow Gardens in Whiting Forest?
Yeah, if you don't mind, I'd like to start with a little history of the gardens. The founder of Dow Chemical, his daytime job, of course, was creating chemicals to better our lives, but in the evenings, his passion definitely was in gardening, and he loved the ornamental plants, but he especially loved growing apple trees, and he took gardening just as seriously as he took his occupation, and so it's fortunate we have a lot of notes and such. And then in his passing away, his wife opened the gardens up for many friends and visitors. And so after she passed away, the question was what to do with this beautiful estate. And it was decided to open it up to the public. And so we have the public have the advantage of a long historical garden here in Midland, so you can come in and see new plantings as well as some big old trees that adore the gardens. Today you can come in and we have in bloom lots of annuals, perennials. our philosophy kind of is to create a garden to inspire people in their own landscape. And so we have a wide range of plant material and a wide range of types of plantings here. I kind of, just like America's kind of a melting pot with human beings, we're kind of a melting pot of many types of gardens here, Mr. Dow, the founder of Dow Chemical, had a son, Alden Dow, who did a lot of design for us in our garden. And he had definitely had an influence of the Japanese gardens. But by all means, we are not a Japanese garden, even though we have elements of that. We have elements of native plantings. So we have a wide range of types of gardens for people to be inspired by.
I remember my first visit to Dow way back when I arrived in Michigan, and I was amazed at the diversity. Also, the maturity of the plant materials. Coming from the East Coast, there's a lot of old estates that were converted into public gardens, and we have some really monumental beech and other plant materials. And the thing that interests me was the same thing at Dow, that I saw these mature specimens, really interesting plants, and again, walking through those gardens, it seemed like each turn, each corner would unveil something really beautiful and interesting.
Yeah, just to give you an exact date, Mr. Dow planted his first trees in 1899, so that's kind of when we say the garden started. And so you can imagine the maturity of those trees that he originally planted.
Yeah, it's always interesting when we suggest different plants to people, and they buy a 2-inch or a 3-inch caliber tree and plant it in your yard. Really don't know what's in store for them, and in the next 15, 20, 30, 40 years.
Yeah, there's a
Go to
great
a botanical garden.
Yeah, there's a great quote by Mr. Dow, actually, to show his passion for plants. I'm going to mess it up probably, but he basically say you can build a house, and every year it kind of degrades. You got to keep working on it, but you plant a tree and it gets more and more beautiful each and every year and becomes more valuable each and every year. And I really like that quote, if you think about that.
Okay, so stay tuned for more with Chuck Martin of Dow Gardens in Whiting Forest and the PlantMichiganGreen.com Gardening Show on News Talk 760 WJR.
Welcome back to more of the PlantMichiganGreen.com Gardening Show with your host, Dr. Bob Schutzke.
Welcome back. We're here with Chuck Martin from Dow Gardens in Whiting Forest in Midland, Michigan. So Chuck, tell us a little bit more about Dow Gardens.
Yeah, if I may, we talked about that there's a variety of opportunities or different types of gardens within the gardens. And so let me give you some of the gardens within the gardens that might intrigue people. I'll start out with, we have a very formal herb garden that is very well maintained. And so if you are into seeing a formal herb garden with straight lines and such, we have that. Throughout the gardens, we have a lot of annual beds. So you can come and evaluate some annuals to put color into your gardens. Those annual beds will be switched out into tulip beds in the spring. We like to say that coming to the gardens, you can experience Holland only with a beautiful landscape and behind it. We plant only about 25,000 tulips a year throughout the gardens. And then going back to the annuals, we plant over 30,000 annuals throughout the garden. So, you see a lot of color. And then another thing, another highlight is we do, have a rose garden that has a lot of old-fashioned type roses and a lot of the hybrid teas and floribundas and grandiflora as well as miniature roses and David Austin roses. So, depending on what your take and love of roses, but I can tell you this, no matter what your age is, you love to put your nose into a rose. And so we encourage you to smell the roses. So another thing that we have in the gardens is called the children's garden. And, I've had the opportunity to visit a lot of gardens, and sometimes our children's gardens turn into play areas, But we have a true children's garden, and we work a lot in trying to teach kids that your beans and fruit and such does not come from the grocery store. It starts another step back at a farm. And so the kids can come in and see actually vegetable and fruit plants growing, and they can pick what we say is, please pick one for each hand, So it's fun to see kids get excited about where their food comes from. And with that, we also have an educational program called Growing Gardeners, where kids can actually have a plot. And we try to encourage that it's families having plots so that we get a lot of family interaction.
I love children's gardens for that particular reason, because a lot of times children's gardens are what sparks a child to become a horticulturist or a gardener in their later years.
Yeah, Bob. You know me well enough that I do a lot of going off on tangents, but I think it's so important for the development of children to be out in nature. There's a book, Last Child in the Woods, that I just think is really great, and so we do encourage families to come out to the gardens, and along those lines, we have paths throughout the gardens, but if you see something off the path, please walk on our grass. I think you see a lot of gardens that says do not walk on the grass. We should put out signs, please walk on the grass to experience to experience the gardens, and try to find a hiding place that you can relax away from people.
I often, when I go off to different gardens on these busman's holidays, is to find a stump, a bench, or a seat somewhere where you can kind of just take it all in, because it's amazing what you can find or what you notice when you just stop and take an extended look.
Yeah, along those lines, we've had people. We're pretty close to the hospital. We've had people, Bob, that go and say take a chemotherapy treatment, and then come over and spend time in the gardens, and we get notes saying that their healing process, we help their healing process, and so. The same thing as you just mentioned, it's very important, I think, for a public garden to add to the healing of people.
Yeah, I'd like to go back and just mention something on the roses.
Yes.
I love David Austin roses.
Yes.
When you think about those old, and sometimes they're referred to as the cabbage roses because of the amount of petals they have. They are something really spectacular. So to have this is for our listeners, if you haven't seen a collection of David Austin roses, it's worth the trip or the visit just to take in those particular selections.
Yeah, for many years I was the rosarian here, and so I studied the history of roses. And, like in the 70s and 80s, Bob, I'm sure you can remember, They concentrated a lot in the breeding of disease resistance, and they forgot something called fragrance.
Right. Yeah.
And so if you look at the David Austin roses, they have brought that fragrance back, which is great, as well as disease resistance. And you're not going to get a pointed rose. You're going to get, I guess you would call, like you said, a cabbage rose or an old-fashioned rose. But you're going to get the fragrance, and you're going to appreciate that rose both in early morning and the evening. And so, yeah, David Austin has done some really nice breeding in their roses.
Yeah. Cool.
So,
So I know. Recently, there's been the development of the Whiting Forest. Can you share some things about
Yeah.
the Whiting Forest?
yeah. So, like I said, I was the Rosarian, and now I've moved over to the Whiting Forest area, and it's about 55 acres of forest land that we have handicap or trails throughout that wheelchairs can go on, but. And that's cool because we've had people come up to us and say they've never been able to get out into the woods. And this is a woods right in the middle of the city. But not only that, we have what we call the Canopy Walk. And this is a walk that goes up into the forest. And so I like to tell people they're not walking in the forest, they're walking up into the forest. And so you get a view of the forest like you've never had before. You know, you're up there with different angles. And so on that view, you get to see an orchard. And in this orchard, it has over 100 different varieties of apples, which is kind of neat. We kind of brought back that tradition that Mr. Dow had with his love of growing apples, and we have a lot of the apples that he grew.
Do you harvest those apples?
Well, it's interesting. The Whiting Forest has only been developed in the last 3 years, and our orchard specialist or pomologist, he is making forms or forming the tree and pruning the tree, and so he's not trying to produce fruit at this point in time. But, you know, I'm kind of on him that someday he's going to have to start producing some fruit. But I appreciate the fact that you have confidence in us that we'll produce fruit. But,
Yeah.
we will be producing fruit probably next year. And it's our hope, once again, to educate the public about that fruit. And so work with the public in allowing them to taste. You go to the grocery store, Bob, and you see maybe at the most 10 varieties of apples. 100 years ago they had hundreds of varieties of apples. Apples for applesauce, apples for baking pie, apples for making cider, early apples, mid-season apples, and late season, because you couldn't harvest them all at the same time. And so we've brought back a lot of those old, heritage type apples in that.
Are they all labeled?
They will be all labeled too for you. Yes.
That's interesting because I'm sure at some point in time there will be requests for some of that scion wood from other botanical gardens or arboreta.
Yeah, Bob, I'm going to put you on the spot right now. An example of a unique apple is, do you know that Thomas Jefferson was quite a gardener?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, and so do you know his favorite apple?
No, I don't.
It was an apple called Spitzenberg, and there's an example of an apple that was very, very popular 100 years ago, and it was, or even 200 years ago, but it's gone out of the trade. And so we bring back those, we're trying to show people kind of the heritage of the apple. And I call it, a lot of people call them Honeycrisp, but I call them Moneycrisp because they're so expensive.
Right.
But you can see that apple and you can see the ancestor. We even have apples in our orchard that have been brought over from Russia. Some of the original apples brought to our country. So it's kind of an interesting orchard. But then we also at the Whiting Forest have a cafe that you can relax. And the cafe is right outside of a play area that is very well used by the young children. And so there's a lot of activity that's happening. And it just in our short time, you can see that we go everything. We've got a wide range of encouraging people to get out into nature.
Yeah. Well, hold those thoughts again. We need to take another short break. So stay tuned for more from Chuck Martin and the PlantMichiganGreen.com Gardening Show on News Talk 760 WJR. Welcome back. We're here with Chuck Martin from Dow Gardens in Whiting Forest in Midland, Michigan, and have been talking about features of the gardens and the forest. So Chuck, on a few times that we've talked, you've told me about your meadow plantings and your rain garden plantings and how you've developed a native plant palette for those particular areas. So could you share some of that for our listeners?
Yeah, thanks a lot, Bob. That has become more and more of a passion of mine is these native plants. First of all, I want to tell you that the reason I like native plants is, number one, they have a really deep root system. And because they have that deep root system, Bob, we're not irrigating them as much as, say, our turf grass, okay? And then the other thing, and I think the Europeans have discovered this before we have, is our native perennial plants have a real long bloom period. A lot of us, well, for instance, a peony, peonies are beautiful for today, and then tomorrow it rains and you got to wait for next year. But, the perennials that are native are here just we see some of our native perennials actually bloom just like an annual throughout the growing season. And so those two things I think are what's really exciting for me about looking at these native, especially perennial plants. And so, like you mentioned, first of all, I think I'd like to start with the rain gardens. In our parking lot, we have what we call rain gardens, and this is where the water from the parking lot, instead of going into the drainage system, which goes into to the rivers, and we can go on to the pollution, but really doesn't have time. Our water goes into what we call rain gardens, or a swell. A bioswell is the scientific way. And in there we have native plants that will take that high water table as well as take a drought. And it's just beautiful all year long. The plants have been selected. We see them in bloom. And then the other area that we have is what I call the meadow area. And each year that becomes more and more beautiful, more exciting for the visitors to see. And we've planted a lot of prairie plants, and so you see a lot of the native grasses going on, as well as some of the tall cup plants and some of the plants out of the aster family. So to me that is getting pretty exciting. And throughout that area we have turf grass pathways there people can walk through, and it's kind of like a maze of these big beautiful perennials that people are able to walk through. And I tell people all the time, it's the world's best place to play tag or hide and seek, because you got these beautiful paths going through this beautiful meadow. So anyways, cool. I'm really excited about those areas for the public to see. a more naturalized garden, I would say.
Let's go back to the rain gardens. How did you choose the plants to use? Because quite often people have the misconception that rain garden plants have to like wet feet, when in fact the rain gardens are wet when it rains and they're dry when it doesn't. And so having plants that can tolerate the diversity of soil conditions and the diversity of moisture is real important. So how did you go ahead and how did you choose the plants to use there?
Well, I think a lot of it, you go back to a statement I made before, Bob, is these native plants have this really deep root system, okay? And they seem to hold up, a lot of these plants seem to hold up really good in drought, okay? And they can take that high water table. Now, our soils that we've put in there are very well drained, so that when I say it's got a high water table, it's only there for a week or so,
Right.
And these plants with the root system seem to these native plants seem to do very well in that constraint of a high and low water table, and I think it's because of that deep root system, and so we talk about floodplain plants, like your silver maples and stuff like that.
Right.
And it is almost like a floodplain environment that we're giving these, where you have, the floodplain where it has the different heights. You can go through a drought in the summer and stuff. And so we have looked at those kinds of plants.
Yeah. You made a really important point. In my opinion, probably the most important factor in a rain garden is the soil type.
Yes.
And the whole idea of a rain garden, the intent is that it doesn't allow surface water to last more than 48 hours. Okay, which means that there has to be porous enough that the pore space is filled by the surface water, but yet underneath that or beneath that porous soil type, the water has to eventually percolate into groundwater. And so in many respects, the plant materials are like the icing on the cake. Okay, they look pretty, they're there for us to visualize, but the most important thing about that rain garden is the headspace in the soil that can absorb and hold that water without having standing water or puddling for a prolonged period of time.
And Bob, I like your word filter when you said it filters that water. We have a great asset in Michigan with a lot of fresh water. And when you say it filters the water, not only by the soil, but the roots and such. And so I really like that when we talk about rain gardens, the filtering of the water.
Okay, so tell us about the meadow, because it was interesting when we talked a while ago, and you talked about the weed competition, and by your prep, the different prep that you made in the meadow made all the difference in terms of how successful the desirable plants were coming on.
Yeah, like what's cool about horticulture, Bob, and even though you have a doctorate, you still learn something each and every day when you work with plants,
Yeah, you got that right.
Yeah, in fact, I like to think of myself that education teaches you what you don't know. But anyways, Bob, what we did was we made the decision. You have to make a decision whether to go with seed or plugs, or baby plants, or seed it. Seeding is cheaper, but you get a quicker result, of course, with plugs, okay? And so we decided to go with plugs. And what we did was we made beds, and then each year we decided we would expand those beds. And we we put turf over the whole area. We were going to do the meadow, and then we killed off the bed where we're going to put beds in. Okay, the first year what we did was we killed off that area, and I rototilled it, and I rototilled it, and I rototilled it, and we planted, and we thought we did a good job. The second year, Bob, what I did was we killed it off, and I didn't rototill it. And instead, I got a little auger that you put on a drill, and we drilled and we put the plugs in. And what we found out is actually the plants that we planted in the second year looked so much better than we did in the first year. And we didn't have to weed as much because that turf that we killed off was like a mulch. Do you understand that? Did I explain?
Oh yeah, right. Yeah,
Like a mulch, and so we didn't have to weed as much, and also the plants are greener looking, they're healthier looking, and so I believe that tilling actually broke up the soil structure, broke down the organic matter quicker, and the health of the plants. I mean, here we are in the third year, and you can still see that the plants are so much healthier by not tilling than by tilling.
The other thing is the seed bank. When you till,
oh yes,
we know that seed, the longevity of many of the weed seeds is many years, and so when you till, you're actually bringing up dormant seeds from lower in the soil profile. You're bringing them up to the surface and making them readily available for germination.
You're right on, Bob. You're right on, buddy. Because of the fact that we're weeding still much more the beds that we tilled than we are the ones that we didn't till. Yeah. So there's a lot more maintenance going on, and it was a lot easier to plant with these augers than it was in the tilled beds. A lot easier. So manpower, we've done. The second method was so much better for us.
Yeah. Chuck, we're gonna take another short break and come back. And when we come back, I want you to inform our listeners on how they can get more information about the Dow Gardens in Whiting Forest, and hopefully schedule a trip up there. So stay tuned for more from Chuck Martin and the PlantMichiganGreen.com Gardening Show on News Talk 760 WJR.
Now back to more gardening with your host, Dr. Bob Schutzke, on the PlantMichiganGreen.com Gardening Show. Here's Dr. Bob.
Welcome back. We're here with Chuck Martin from Dow Gardens in Whiting Forest, and his last information was about the native plants that they've been planting in their meadow and rain gardens. And so I encourage you, if it's possible, take a trip up to the Whiting Forest just to look at those native plantings, the meadows, the rain gardens, because it's certainly something that you can bring back home. So, Chuck, can you inform our listeners on how they can get more information about the gardens and the forest, and hopefully plan a visit?
Yeah, Bob. So our website is dowgardens.org, and you can definitely go on that website and find out a lot of information on activities that are happening and see pictures of the gardens. It's 110 acres of botanical gardens. We're located at 1809 Eastman Avenue here in Midland, Michigan. So I hope you don't make it a rest stop, but it is on the way up north for many of you. Plan to be here an hour or two to cover everything. You can also call us at 989-631-2677, and I guarantee you're going to talk to somebody nice. They're paid to be nice, and so
it's helpful.
So everybody on the phone are sweethearts. They even talk to me. So, Bob, you know what that's like.
Yeah, you know what? You're right.
Yeah, so so anyways, yeah, come visit us, and you can see our activities there on that website. And I really believe it has something for every person that loves to be outside enjoying nature.
Any features that are coming up this fall that they should focus in on?
Well, right now we have a beautiful display of glasswork by a gentleman by the name of Craig Mitchell Smith throughout the garden, and people have been really enjoying that. I know there's even planned an evening walk that they're going to put lights on it. And so if you've seen Craig Mitchell Smith's work, that's great. Go on the website. One of the things that I should highlight is in the spring, we do have a butterfly display in our conservatory. So, there's something for everybody, Bob.
Well, thanks. You know what? This has been real helpful. You've shared a lot of useful information, not only in visiting the gardens, but in terms of your dealing with your native plants. So thanks for spending this time with us today, Chuck.
Well, thank you, Bob, for inviting me.
Yeah, it's our pleasure. Okay, for the listeners, don't forget to visit our website, plantmichigangreen.com, and click on Ask the Expert to submit your landscape and gardening questions. You may hear your questions and answers on the air. And remember to tune in every Saturday at 4 p.m. through August for the best information and advice to maximize your outdoor living experience. And during the week, log on to plantmichigangreen.com, your landscaping and horticulture resource, to find a professional, a retail garden center, or pose your gardening questions. That's all for this week, and I'd like to give you a preview of next week. Next week, we're going to have Dr. Kevin Frank from Michigan State University. He's a turf grass specialist, and he's going to share all the information that you need to know going in the fall and caring for your lawns. Everything from seeding to fertilization and any other types of lawn care. So please join us. Thanks for joining us this week, but please consider joining us next week. I'm Dr. Bob, wishing you sunshine and happy gardening, and we'll talk again.
You've been listening to the PlantMichiganGreen.com Gardening Show with Dr. Bob Schutzke, presented by the Michigan Nursery and Landscape Association.